South Korea and Canada are seeking ways to foster momentum for broader industrial partnership in strategic sectors. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello, welcome to Press Perspective. It's Friday, February 6th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Major economies are seeking long-term reliable trade partners to ensure sustainable as well as resilient growth, and South Korea and Canada are no exceptions. For more on this, I have Steven Borowiec with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Steven, welcome back.
Happy Friday to everyone.
I also have Chloe Borgnon with French broadcaster France 24 here in the studio with us. Chloe, it's great to have you here.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Right, Stephen, we start with you. So Canada's Secretary of State for Defense Procurement Stephen Fuhr was here in South Korea this week. Let's start off with the purpose of his visit.
I think the purpose of his visit, I'm sure it was manyfold, but I think the kind of main thing that we would focus on in our discussion is that he was assessing some potential bidders for a major Canadian submarine project. So Canada is looking, the submarine fleet that it currently has, I think they are aiming to, or should I say we? Should I say, because I'm a Canadian, should I say we are aiming? I don't know, I'm confused about these things.
For sure, we sounds good.
Okay, so we are looking to renew our fleet of submarines by around 2030. And so Canada has one of the, perhaps even the longest coastline in the world, and there could be all kinds of, in this new and less predictable world order that we're living in, I think that Canada is kind of looking down the road and seeing that it's going to be ever more important to have top-notch surveillance capabilities in those areas and potential combat abilities in those areas. And South Korea, as we all know, is an industrial powerhouse and an emerging force in the global arms procurement sector. And so Stephen Fuhr visited Hanwha, and I think he visited Hyundai too, and he was assessing some of their capabilities. He visited a shipyard in Goje Island, I believe, in the south of the country, and he visited a Hyundai Heavy Industries facility in Pangyo, which is just in the kind of Silicon Valley of Korea, just south of Seoul. And so I believe that, as far as I know, South Korea is a kind of leading candidate for this project, and the two sides are seeing where things stand, and I think looking for areas of mutual complementarity.
Right, indeed. And Stephen, could you briefly tell us a bit more about the Canadian Patrol Submarine project? How big is this project, and when can we expect to see the first submarines perhaps going to Canada?
It involves 12 submarines, I believe, and I think it's worth 60 billion Canadian dollars, which is, I think, is something like 44 billion US or no, maybe even less than that. I don't follow the Forex markets as close as I should, but 60 billion Canadian dollars, that much I know. And I think the plan is to have these submarines procured and kind of in the early stages of getting ready to go by 2028, so that they are able to be fully functional by 2030. And so, I think just to unpack the kind of bigger meaning of this, when you look at the Canadian government's comments on this, with a lot of government statements, you need to kind of read between the lines a little bit. And there's a number of kind of subtle allusions to growing global challenges and the changing world order. And of course, just the backdrop of this is that Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney made a very show-stealing speech at the Davos gathering pretty recently. And he said things about how we are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition in the global world order, and that smaller countries like Canada were going to have to adapt to this world order where greater powers were more apt to use their size to coerce smaller countries. And so middle power countries such as Canada were going to have to make alternate arrangements. So they're going to really try to harness whatever their strengths are. Like you mentioned, Canada being a major exporter of energy. Canada also has a geographical advantage in that it occupies this very big and very strategic area. But just to channel the core purpose of this submarine project is occupying a big and strategic geographic area is an advantage, but it also entails a great deal of responsibility because you have to manage this area, you have to survey it, you have to make sure you know what's happening there and be able to protect your interests there. As we all know, because of climate change and any number of other factors, the Arctic is an area of growing global significance. There are more countries competing for influence there. If you've been reading the news, you've probably seen that Greenland in recent weeks and months has been, for normally a pretty quiet part of the world, has been in the news a lot. I'm sure Canadian policymakers are aware of that and are looking to buttress their interests in that area as best they can. And it looks like they might be able to finagle some help from South Korean firms to that end.
Right, and staying with this, Chloe, just days before this trip by the Canadian delegation to South Korea, Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Moon-sik led a South Korean delegation to Canada. Could you tell us a bit about the South Korean delegation's visit?
Yeah, so it was just end of January, so last week. So it's, as you said, very door-to-door delegation going from one country to the others. It's to note that it was a high-level delegation. So there was Kang Moon-sik as the Presidential Special Envoy for Strategic Economic Cooperation. It's kind of a new position that was made for him. And he was with the Minister of Trade, the Minister of Defense Acquisition Program Administration, and the head of some of the country top shipbuilders, because they are supposed to be making the idea of the bid from South Korea is a consortium with multiple shipbuilders that would be working together to make the new submarines for Canada. So it is all part of the Lee Jae-myung administration flagship defense export initiatives. The idea, the goal is actually to elevate South Korea from the position, like 10 positions at the moment in the exports of weapons, to the world top 4 defense exporters. And so the delegation was in Canada to promote the Korean deal and the Korean bid, because as we were saying, they're one of the top contenders and they're like up against Germany for now. So it was a way to kind of wow the Canadian government and try to show the strengths of South Korea to try to get the bid a bit further in their position.
Right, and speaking about this bid, Stephen, we understand why this particular project is very important for Canada. What makes winning the bid for the Canadian Patrol Submarine project important for South Korea, do you think?
I would just say, I mean, on an industry like this, every kind of big project is important strictly by virtue of its size. I mean, this is a kind of industry that functions in this very lumpy sort of way. Countries, as we know, this is a project that's meant to take place 12 years from now. So this is like it's a very long-term, very sort of a lot is riding on every decision because the decisions are very entail a lot of strategic significance and a lot of money. So in the arms industry, you've really got to go in on every bid because there just simply are not that many of them. So if South Korea were to win this bid, there's just the immediate resulting benefits of it brings in a whole bunch more revenue for this company, it creates jobs, it raises South Korea's international profile in this area. And just more specifically, when it comes to Canada, if they were to sell to Canada, this is a major G7 country, a major Western country, a country that is in the Western Hemisphere, the Northern Hemisphere, and I think it's just it's different geographically. It would entail a lot more exposure for South Korea as a maker of submarines, and just as we've been discussing, as the Arctic becomes more and more of a priority, and as coastal surveillance becomes more and more of a priority, it would significantly raise South Korea's profile. So it's significant in a number of areas, I think.
Right. Now, South Korea's Hanwha Ocean, Chloe, faces competition from Germany's ThyssenKrupp for Canada's submarine project. Now, this German conglomerate, I believe, is close to concluding a submarine deal with India. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so according to the media, especially local media, but and also specialized press, the deal is about to be finalized. So India and Germany are in the last step of the intergovernmental agreement. So that's kind of nearly a done deal. It's clearing the way for officials to sign the main contract, and it would be happening probably through a visit from German officials in India by the end of March. So that's according to specialized press. That seems to be kind of quite sure of what they're saying there. So what we're speaking about is a deal that's worth around $10 billion to to build the next generation conventional submarines for India. So a bit like for Canada, India is trying to replace its fleet. It's been already starting to replace some, and there are need by 2030 as well to be replacing the last ones. There's multiple reasons for that. So they want to strengthen their defense. They want to modernize the technology. And that's also why they will be calling for the German for that. And also the idea will be to create jobs in India for the local economy that has been quite impacted by the tariffs deals made by Donald Trump earlier last year, actually. So the deal is between India's leading shipbuilding company and Germany ThyssenKrupp, I'm not saying it as well as you, marine system, and they will be building the submarines together. And so, yeah, there's kind of a sense of emergency and urgency for India as they have to retire the older submarines quite soon. And also the idea would be that thanks to those new submarines, they will also be up to date for the technology, because in this kind of environment, it's always useful to be up to date with the others in the same area.
Right, for sure. Meanwhile, back here in the country, Stephen, there are quite a number of pundits here who believe that the security partnership inked by President Lee Jae-myung and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Gyeongju late last year would perhaps raise Hanwha's chances of winning this bid. That being said, could you tell us a bit more about the security partnership signed between South Korea and Canada?
Well, I was reviewing the wording of it, in preparation for today, and it contains, like a lot of big international diplomatic agreements, you kind of have to look at the subtext, and you have to kind of maybe read between the lines a little bit. Like quite near the beginning of it, it refers to a deteriorating international security environment. I mean, I would love to be in a Q&A. I wish they had a Q&A session down in Gyeongju, because I would have loved to ask, like, what are the specific ways in which you feel as though the international security environment is deteriorating, and who is driving those deteriorations, and what are you planning to do about them? Unfortunately, we didn't get that opportunity, but clearly the two countries recognize that something is happening that they feel as though they need to adapt to, and that they need to raise their security capabilities to respond to. And there's another clause that I thought was noteworthy is they said that threats to our security and prosperity are more interconnected than ever before, and that security across regions is increasingly interlinked. And so they specifically, the regions that they have in mind is the kind of broader Asia-Pacific region, and then the broader kind of Euro-Atlantic region. And so we don't know exactly what went on behind the scenes, and what these two leaders talked about when they were able to get into specifics away from the nosy ears of reporters like me. But I mean, you have to just assume that with the intensifying great power rivalry between the United States and China, and with both of the world's two biggest powers acting as though they care less about old customs of international affairs than ever before, about what we've been calling the rules-based international order, the idea that there are norms that discourage more powerful countries from using their size and their power to exert influence on smaller countries. That is changing, and it seems as though these two countries are just seeking to adapt to those changes. And I think the publics in both of these countries, if either Carney or President Lee were to go in front of their publics and explain why they see each other as viable partners at this point, and why they see each other as, despite being in very different parts of the world, as having perhaps more than ever in common, and having a more urgent reason to cooperate, I think that would be a message that most members of those countries would agree with, and would be supportive of this kind of increased togetherness.
Right. Moving forward, Chloe, quite a number of South Korea's defense exports clientele are European. Tell us a bit about them, and what's the latest on that front with regard to South Korea's defense exports? Yeah,
so as I was saying before, the goal for South Korea is by 2030 to be in the top 4 defense exporters. They're currently in the top 10. So the idea was to kind of market towards 2 specific places, the Middle East and Europe, because they are the ones with the most demand actually at the moment. So according to the presidential office at the end of 2025, they were saying that the total value of ongoing defense procurement projects under discussion with European countries would be worth $56.2 billion. So they're not the ones who are done, the one in negotiation and is being discussed, the one that can be actually talked about, because we can imagine that there might be some deals that are in too much early stage to be discussed. We can see through the itinerary of the different delegations this time, and also in October when they were going there. We don't know exactly which countries they've been to, but we know that they've been for sure to Romania, to Poland, to Norway. And those, if we look at those countries, they're the one with whom South Korea is making the most deal at the moment. So Poland is doing 46% of South Korea's arms sales. It's kind of expected of them because they're very close to Ukraine and to Russia. So we know that since the beginning of the Russian war in Ukraine, Poland has been really demanding to get a better defense and like rearm itself. It's kind of what's happening in Europe, but Poland was one of the main one. So we know that South Korea has been selling tanks and jets to them since 2022, actually. And Poland has been appraising the fact that South Korea is very fast to deliver. They're also adapting very well to the demand. So we know that Poland is kind of a very big market for South Korea at the moment. Romania, there is a project to acquire new infantry fighting vehicles. There again, it would be $3.5 billion project, and we know that Hanwha is kind of placing itself on the bid at the moment to kind of get this contract. And then Norway, that was revealed actually very recently this week. Hanwha Aerospace said on Monday that they won the contract to supply long-range artillery systems and rockets to the country. So that's a very fresh new deal that just happened. There's still some difficulties that could happen for South Korea. And one of the main one is that Europe is developing new rules for its industrial defense. And they'll trying to get the favoring systems where European companies would be more involved into the manufacturing or the design. So there is a risk for South Korea that products that would be designed and manufactured in South Korea might have harder time at one point to get into the European market, as Europe is also trying to defend its own defense and manufacturing industry.
Right. Against the backdrop of those challenges then, Stephen, as Chloe mentioned earlier, the Lee Jae-myung administration is seeking to rank South Korea within the top 5, specifically speaking 4th as an arms exporter. That being said, who are the current top 5 as we speak, and how does South Korea seek to hope to that is achieve this ambitious goal?
I believe there are the U.S., France, Russia, China, and Germany. I believe those are the top 5, and I think South Korea, according to the Stockholm Research Institute's latest ranking, South Korea is 10th. As to how they plan to do that, I think there are some pretty clear parallels between South Korea's rise in the arms industry as in some other industries, whereas it carved out its international position by being able to compete on speed and price initially. So, you know, a big, as Chloe was just alluding to, like a big turning point for the industry here came in recent years as South Korea was able to step in and provide quick and accurate shipments of artillery to countries like Poland and other countries that just so happen to be on the western fringe of Russia's sphere of influence. And so South Korea has been able to take advantage of the fact that it has this quite robust industrial production capacity, and it has, you know, South Korean companies tend to be very disciplined and very reliable, and, you know, able to turn in orders on time and at very competitive prices. This is the way that South Korea carved out its space in shipbuilding and in, you know, however many other areas of manufacturing. But as any professor of economics will tell you, there's a kind of diminishing returns in having that approach to businesses, because eventually other competitors are able to catch up. And if you really want to be viable over the long term, it has to come from innovation. So I imagine what the you know, behind in boardrooms of these South Korean defense firms, what they're really talking about is investing in their research and development and investing in innovative capacity and trying to get to a place where they are producing goods that other companies do not know how to produce. So I think the short answer to how South Korea is going to get to being a top 5 defense exporter, I think, is going to have to come from, you know, some good fortune and a lot of hard work with in investing in new and more innovative products. I think it's also going to have to come from a lot of state support. You know, South Korea is still a far smaller country than some of economically than the 5 countries that we mentioned earlier, and some of the countries that are in the 7 through 9 range. But this country has a real can-do spirit. I think there's, given the challenges in the economy nowadays, the current government has a really strong incentive to bolster export-oriented industries, you know, just for purposes of job creation and for purposes of international competitiveness. So it will be something to watch in the coming years.
Right, indeed. And in the meantime, Chloe, what do you suppose is driving South Korea's campaign for broader defense export diplomacy, if you will?
Yeah, so there's, first of all, the increasing demand from outside countries. As I was just saying and touching upon before, but the wars that are happening at the moment, they're a reminder for most countries that they have to rearm themselves and that defense should not be taken lightly. And we've seen that, especially since the war of Russia against Ukraine in Europe, for example. But we also know that Israel and Gaza has been also playing a big game, like in the Middle East, about reinforcing the arms industries. And then there's another thing, again, a bit more about Europe probably, but NATO's commitment that each member country has said that they will increase their contribution to defense, to national defense, to 5% of their GDP. The minimum at the moment was supposed to be 2%. Most of them are not even reaching the 2%. So going up to 5%, which is a demand by Donald Trump once again, it's going to take time and it's going to take a lot of money from all those countries. And most of them do not have necessarily the national capacities to do it by themselves. So they might turn to other countries, and South Korea being one of them. And as Steven was saying, there's this thing that they are capable of being fast and being able to deliver quickly, so that could play a big role there. And then there's also the weakening of some other key competitors. We're speaking about the top 10. So the US are number 1 in defense exportation, but because of tariffs ordered by Donald Trump and the war of tariffs that he's been making, there's been retaliatory measures from some partners who decided to turn away from the US on some aspects that they could do. So maybe weapon exportation would be having a hard time with that. And then the other thing is rising costs, disrupted supply chains that make it harder for the companies like defense industry to be reliable in the delivery. The other one that's also been weakened at the moment is Israel. For some time they were increasing their arms sales, but in the same time they need to keep their national industry for themselves, and there was also some backlash because of the war in Gaza. So for example, Slovenia has recently said that there will be no more export or import of weapons between them and Israel as long as the war in Gaza was going on. So that's kind of the thing that could be playing a good thing for South Korea, because if your competitors are getting weaker, then you have more chance to be selling it to more customers and to get to higher top rank.
Right, essentially to expand its clientele then. All right, Chloe, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, that brings us to the end of this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. See you same time next Monday.